You're about to hear about the day I watched a 26-year-old punk destroy his own uncle's company because he thought my handwritten contact book was outdated. I'm Stephen Walsh, 48 years old, and I spent 14 years building relationships that this kid torched in about 14 minutes. The boardroom on the 42nd floor always smelled like coffee and leather chairs. You know that smell when big money's about to change hands. I'd been breathing that air for a decade and a half, working my way up to Senior Director of Strategic Development at Pinnacle Holdings. Sounds boring, right? Let me put it this way. When Fortune 500 manufacturing companies wanted to merge, they called me first. See, most people think business happens in spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. That's amateur hour. Real business happens in hunting lodges, over bourbon dinners, and in conversations that start with, "My grandfather always said." I learned this from my mentor, Captain Jim Rodriguez, who taught me that a handshake from the right person was worth more than a 100-page contract from the wrong one. That Tuesday morning, I was standing by the window going through my handwritten notes for the biggest deal of my career, $3,200,000. Patrick Murphy wanted to merge his family's manufacturing operations with us, and I'd spent 14 months building that relationship. Not through emails or video calls, but the old-fashioned way. Face-to-face meetings, hunting trips at his lodge in Montana, and long dinners where we talked about everything except business until dessert arrived. Murphy Industrial Group wasn't just another acquisition target. This was 4 generations of family legacy built from a small machine shop his great-grandfather opened in 1924. Patrick's grandfather had survived the Great Depression by making parts for military vehicles. His father had modernized the operation in the 1970s, and Patrick had turned it into a $4 billion defense contracting empire. But he was 64 now. His kids weren't interested in manufacturing, and he wanted to find the right partner before his health declined further. The key wasn't the $3.2 billion price tag. The key was understanding what Patrick really wanted: respect for his family's legacy, assurance that the Murphy name would be preserved on the facilities, and guarantees that the 600 families who worked those plants wouldn't be thrown out for efficiency improvements. These weren't line items in a contract. They were promises built on trust. I had all of that trust documented the only way that mattered: in my personal relationship with Patrick, in handwritten notes from our conversations, and in my worn leather contact book that contained 14 years of carefully cultivated relationships. Phone numbers that weren't listed anywhere online. Private cell numbers written on the backs of business cards from veterans events and charity galas. Direct lines to people who made decisions worth billions. You see, my contact book wasn't just contact information. It was 14 years of relationships built one handshake at a time. When you've sat in a duck blind at 5 a.m. with a manufacturing CEO listening to him talk about his grandfather's struggles during the Depression, you're not just business contacts anymore. You're something rarer in the corporate world. You're friends. That's when the door slammed open. Christopher Brooks walked in like he owned the place, which technically his uncle did. His daddy was nowhere to be seen, but Uncle William was CEO of Pinnacle Holdings. This kid was 26, fresh out of Harvard with an MBA that probably cost more than my annual salary. Designer jeans, $400 sneakers, Apple Watch, and that particular brand of arrogance that comes from never having to earn anything. It was his second week on the job as Chief Innovation Officer, and he was already swinging his weight around. "Excuse me," he said, not even looking at me. He was staring at my desk like he'd found something disgusting. I set down my notes. "Can I help you, Christopher?" "Yeah, you can help me understand why we're still running a business like it's 1995. He pointed at my contact book, the same leather-bound organizer I'd been building since my first day at the company. "What is that thing?" "That's my client database," I said calmly. "Your what?" He actually laughed, a sharp sound that carried across the open floor plan. A few analysts looked up from their computers. "Dude, we have Salesforce. We have CRM systems. We have cloud-based everything. Why are you keeping handwritten cards like some kind of museum piece?" I looked at this kid in his designer clothes and his complete ignorance of how real business worked. "Because some relationships can't be digitized, Christopher. When Patrick Murphy calls me at 10 p.m. to discuss a problem with his grandfather's original manufacturing patents, he's not looking at a CRM entry. He's talking to someone he trusts." "Trust?" Christopher scoffed. "This is 2024, not 1984. Everything needs to be in the cloud, accessible to the team, trackable through analytics. You're creating data silos with this ancient garbage. It's inefficient and frankly embarrassing. The room went completely quiet. Junior executives stopped typing. Analysts froze mid-coffee sip. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a public execution, and I was about to become the example. "Christopher," I said, keeping my voice level but letting just a hint of steel creep in. "I'm meeting with Murphy in 2 days to finalize a $3.2 billion merger. This ancient garbage is why he chose to partner with us instead of our 5 competitors who've been courting him for 18 months. His face turned red. He wasn't used to pushback, especially not from someone his father's generation. The kid had probably never been told no in his entire privileged life. What happened next would change everything. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer, and I'm implementing digital transformation initiatives across all departments. You need to transfer all your contacts to the central system immediately and get rid of that outdated garbage. Corporate policy." The way he said it, like he was talking to a disobedient child, made something snap inside me. 14 years of building this company's most valuable relationships, and this punk thought he could just waltz in and reorganize my life's work because he had a fancy title. No. Just like that. No explanation, no negotiation, no corporate speak. The kid wanted to play power games, but he'd picked the wrong opponent. "Excuse me?" he said, his voice going up an octave. "No, I have work to do." That's when he completely lost his mind. "You're fired." The words echoed in the glass-walled office like a gunshot. Everyone froze. You could hear the air conditioning humming, coffee makers gurgling, and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. 50 people pretending to work while watching the most expensive meltdown in company history. I turned around slowly and looked at Christopher's sweaty, triumphant face. The kid actually thought he'd won something. "You want to repeat that?" "You're insubordinate and resistant to change," he said, his voice cracking slightly but getting louder. "You're blocking progress and refusing to follow direct orders. Pack your things. Security will escort you out." I looked at this kid who had just made the biggest mistake of his short, privileged life. He thought firing the project lead 2 days before the biggest deal in company history would make him look strong and decisive. He had no idea he'd just pulled the pin on a grenade that wouldn't explode until he was standing right next to it. "Okay," I said. He blinked. He was expecting a fight, maybe some begging, certainly some dramatic resistance. Instead, I snapped my notebook shut, straightened my tie, and headed for my office. "That's it?" he called after me. "No argument?" "Christopher," I said without turning around. "You're absolutely right. Standards are important. I'll pack my things immediately." Here's what this 26-year-old business school graduate didn't understand about my contact book. It wasn't just contact information. It was 14 years of relationships built one handshake at a time. Phone numbers that weren't listed anywhere online. Private cell numbers written on the backs of business cards from veterans clubs, charity galas, and hunting lodges. Direct lines to people who made decisions worth billions, scribbled on cocktail napkins during conversations that mattered. More importantly, it was trust. When you've shared a hunting blind with a CEO at dawn, listening to him talk about his family's legacy while waiting for deer, you understand what really matters to him. When you've sat through charity dinners and heard the stories behind the success, you know what drives these men. That kind of knowledge doesn't get uploaded to Salesforce. My office was controlled chaos of 14 years' worth of relationship building. Unlike the sterile minimalism of the boardroom, my desk was covered with handwritten thank you notes, photos from charity events, and business cards from people who didn't advertise their services because they didn't need to. There was the crystal paperweight Patrick Murphy had given me after we closed a smaller deal 2 years ago. A bottle of 20-year-old bourbon from a Michigan auto executive whose plants bordered Murphy's facilities. A signed baseball from a Chicago commodities trader who'd introduced me to Patrick in the first place. Each item told a story, represented a relationship that couldn't be digitized or automated. But the real treasure was that worn leather contact book. Every card represented hours of conversation, shared meals, and mutual respect built over years. These weren't digital contacts you could export and import. These were relationships that existed in the spaces between business transactions, in the trust that developed when someone's word actually meant something. I cleaned out my desk slowly, methodically. Personal photos first. My dad at my Navy commissioning ceremony. My hunting foursome from last year's Veterans Charity Tournament. Then the sentimental stuff. Awards, thank you letters, the bottle of bourbon I kept for celebrating closed deals, everything that made this office mine instead of just another corporate cube. Michelle Brooks, Christopher's sister and my assistant, appeared in the doorway looking like she'd witnessed a car accident. "Stephen, is this really happening? Please tell me this is some kind of joke." "It's happening, Michelle," I said, sliding the contact book into my briefcase with the care you'd use to handle a family heirloom. "But don't worry about the Murphy meeting. I'm sure Christopher can handle it. He's got Salesforce, right?" The sarcasm felt good, but it couldn't mask the bigger picture. Christopher had just fired the only person in the company who understood what the Murphy deal actually meant. He thought this was about buying a manufacturing company. He had no idea this was about honoring 4 generations of American craftsmanship and finding a home for Patrick Murphy's life's work. "What about the legacy clauses?" Michelle asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The manufacturing heritage, the grandfather's original patents? Nobody else knows about the emotional significance of preserving the Murphy name on those facilities." I shrugged, continuing to pack. "I'm sure it's all in the digital files somewhere." Of course it wasn't. The real deal, the emotional core of why Patrick Murphy was willing to merge, existed only in conversations I'd had with him over cigars and whiskey at his lodge. The stories about his great-grandfather betting everything on a machine shop when everyone said manufacturing was dead. The pride in building something that lasted through 4 generations. The worry about finding a partner who wouldn't just strip the Murphy name off everything and turn it into another faceless corporate asset. That stuff doesn't get entered into CRM systems. It lives in trust between people who understand that some things matter more than quarterly profit reports. The walk to the elevator would be my last as a Pinnacle Holdings employee, but I had a feeling it wouldn't be my last time in this building. I walked out past the security desk where Timothy Carroll, head of security, was waiting with 2 uncomfortable-looking guards. Timothy had known me for 12 years, had seen me work weekends and holidays when big deals were on the line. We'd served in different branches, but military men recognize each other. "Sorry about this, Stephen," he mumbled, clearly embarrassed. "Orders from upstairs." Christopher was standing by the elevators with his arms crossed, trying to look important and decisive. The kid probably practiced that pose in the mirror. "Make sure he doesn't take any proprietary data," he told Timothy. "He's clean, Mr. Brooks," Timothy said without even checking my briefcase. He knew me. He trusted me. 2 things Christopher would never understand. I stopped in front of Christopher and smiled. Not a bitter smile or a threatening one, a genuine smile. The kind you give someone who has unknowingly just handed you a winning lottery ticket while thinking they're giving you a parking ticket. "Christopher, good luck with the Murphy meeting Thursday," I said. "Just remember, his family built that company in 1924. They value tradition, loyalty, and keeping your word. I'm sure you'll do fine." His brow furrowed. Something in my tone made him nervous, but he couldn't quite figure out what. The kid was smart enough to sense danger, but too arrogant to understand where it was coming from. The elevator doors closed on his confused face, and I rode down 42 floors, thinking about everything that was about to change. Not just for me, but for Pinnacle Holdings, for Patrick Murphy, and especially for Christopher Brooks. I walked 3 blocks to Murphy's Tavern, ordered a double Jameson, and sat in a corner booth to process what had just happened. 14 years of building something real, and it ended because a kid with an MBA didn't understand the difference between data and relationships. But here's the thing about getting older and wiser. You learn to see the bigger picture. Christopher Brooks thought he'd just flexed his muscle and shown everyone who was boss. What he'd actually done was hand me the keys to the most spectacular revenge in corporate history. See, there was something Christopher didn't know about my relationship with Patrick Murphy. Something that wasn't in any digital file or corporate database. Our families had been doing business together for 15 years. My father, God rest his soul, had served under Patrick's father in Vietnam. When Patrick decided to merge, he'd specifically requested me as the liaison, not Pinnacle Holdings, me personally. That distinction was about to become very important. I sat there for 30 minutes nursing that double Jameson and letting everything sink in. The whiskey burned, but not as much as the humiliation of being escorted out like some kind of criminal. 14 years of loyalty, and it ended because some privileged brat thought tradition was inefficient. Then I pulled out my personal phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Not the company's main number, not his business line, but the private cell phone he carried in his shirt pocket. Murphy Industrial, this is Patrick. Mr. Murphy, it's Stephen Walsh. Stephen, good to hear from you. I wasn't expecting your call until tomorrow to confirm our Thursday meeting. Everything still on track? His voice was warm, familiar. We'd shared enough hunting trips and charity dinners that we talked like old friends, not just business associates. Sir, we need to talk. There's been a development. The warmth in his voice immediately shifted to that sharp, focused attention that made Patrick Murphy one of the most successful manufacturers in the Midwest. When you've built a $4 billion empire from a machine shop, you learn to read between the lines. What kind of development? I've been terminated. Silence long enough that I thought the call had dropped. When he spoke again, his voice was ice cold, and I could picture his face hardening the way it did when someone tried to shortchange him on a contract. Terminated by whom? The CEO's nephew, Christopher Brooks, 26 years old, fresh out of business school, some disagreement about business methods. And who's handling our transaction now? Christopher Brooks. He thinks your grandfather's manufacturing patents are inefficient legacy assets that need to be digitized and optimized. Another pause. This one felt dangerous. Patrick Murphy didn't lose his temper often, but when he did, smart people got out of the way. He thinks what exactly? According to him, traditional relationships are outdated. Everything should be data-driven and cloud-based. He fired me for refusing to transfer my personal contacts to their corporate system. I could hear Patrick breathing on the other end. When you've known someone for years, you learn to read their silences. This wasn't confusion. This was controlled fury building like steam in a boiler. Stephen, are you free for dinner tomorrow? I'm unemployed, Mr. Murphy. I'm free all week. Good. Meet me at the Union Club at 7 p.m. And Stephen? Yes, sir. Don't sign anything with those people. Not a severance package, not a non-disclosure agreement, nothing. You understand me? Wouldn't dream of it, sir. I hung up and ordered another whiskey. This one tasted like victory. The trap was set, and Christopher Brooks had no idea he'd just stepped right into it. The next evening, I walked into the Union Club wearing my best charcoal suit and the gold cufflinks my father had given me when I made senior director. The Union Club wasn't just a restaurant. It was an institution where handshake deals were born and corporate dynasties planned their futures. Patrick Murphy was waiting in the library holding 2 glasses of bourbon that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd built an empire through hard work, smart decisions, and treating people with respect. Stephen, he said, standing to shake my hand, you look good for an unemployed man. Thank you, sir. Good genes and stubborn pride. What happened next would seal Christopher Brooks' fate. We settled into leather chairs that were probably older than both of us combined. The bourbon was Pappy Van Winkle 20-year, which told me this wasn't just a social dinner. When Patrick Murphy broke out the good stuff, serious business was about to happen. Tell me exactly what happened, Patrick said, his voice steady, but his eyes hard as flint. I walked him through the whole thing. Christopher's demands about digitizing everything, his complete disrespect for traditional business relationships, the public firing in front of half the company. Patrick listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or taking a sip of bourbon. His face got darker with each detail. This Christopher character called my office this afternoon, Patrick said when I finished. Told my assistant that you were unavailable due to a family emergency, but that he was fully briefed on our arrangement and ready to proceed. I nearly choked on my drink. A family emergency? That was my reaction. See, if you're having a family crisis, we can delay the closing, show some human decency. But if you've been fired... He let that hang in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. That triggers the key personnel clause, I finished. Exactly. So this boy is either incompetent or dishonest. Possibly both. Patrick reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document. Which brings me to why I asked you here. He handed me the papers. It wasn't an employment agreement, it was a partnership proposal. Murphy Industrial is looking for a new senior partner for strategic development. The salary is $320,000 annually, exactly twice what you were making. Equity participation in all deals, full benefits, and a signing bonus that should make up for any lost retirement contributions. I read through the contract carefully. It was comprehensive, generous, and completely legitimate. More money than I'd ever made, working for a man I actually respected. The first assignment, Patrick continued, is finding a partner for the manufacturing operations. But obviously not Pinnacle Holdings. They've disqualified themselves through their own incompetence. What about Thursday's meeting? Patrick smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. It was the smile of a man who'd survived Vietnam, built a business empire, and didn't suffer fools gladly. Oh, I'm still taking that meeting. I want to see this Christopher character try to explain our relationship. I want to watch him realize that he fired the only person who could have saved his deal. And after that? After that, you and I find a real company to handle the merger, one that understands the value of relationships and treats experienced professionals with respect. I looked at the contract again. It was more than just a job offer. It was vindication. It was proof that experience and integrity still mattered in a world increasingly dominated by kids with MBAs and no actual wisdom. I accept, I said, signing my name with the Mont Blanc pen my father had given me. Excellent. Patrick raised his glass. To new partnerships and old-fashioned justice. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Thursday morning. At 9:45, I walked into the lobby of Pinnacle Holdings wearing my new Murphy Industrial Group ID badge and my most expensive suit. I didn't hide in some corner. I stood right there by the security desk in plain sight like a ghost returning to haunt the living. Timothy Carroll spotted me first. His eyes went wide, then he quickly looked away, trying not to draw attention. Smart man. He knew something was about to go very wrong for someone, and he didn't want to be in the blast radius. At 9:58, Christopher Brooks came rushing down from the 42nd floor, looking frantic. His expensive suit was wrinkled, there was sweat on his forehead, and he had the desperate look of someone who'd spent the last 18 hours trying to figure out how to fake expertise he didn't possess. He saw me immediately. "What the hell are you doing here?" he shouted across the marble lobby, his voice echoing off the walls. Every conversation stopped. 50 people turned to watch the show. "I'm here for the Murphy meeting," I said calmly. "You don't work here anymore." "You're absolutely right. I work for Murphy Industrial now." The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might pass out. Anthony Pierce, the CFO, appeared behind him, looking confused and increasingly panicked as he realized what was happening. "What's going on here?" Pierce demanded. "Stephen works for the client now," Christopher stammered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "This has to be some kind of corporate espionage. This is sabotage." "Sabotage?" I laughed. "Christopher, you fired me for refusing to digitize my personal relationships. I found new employment. That's called capitalism." That's when Patrick Murphy walked through the revolving doors. The man had presence that filled a room. At 64, he moved with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from scrap metal and wasn't intimidated by glass towers or corporate politics. He looked around the lobby slowly, taking in the scene. Christopher sweating in his designer clothes, Pierce panicking in his $3,000 suit, me standing calm and professional by the security desk wearing my new company badge. "Gentlemen," Patrick said, his voice carrying across the marble like a judge calling court to order. "I believe we have a meeting scheduled." Christopher stepped forward, trying to compose himself but failing miserably. "Mr. Murphy, there's been some confusion about staffing changes. Stephen Walsh no longer represents Pinnacle Holdings in any capacity. I'm aware," Patrick said, his eyes never leaving Christopher's face. "He represents me now." The silence was absolute. You could hear the air conditioning, the distant hum of elevators, even someone's phone buzzing in the distance. But nobody in that lobby was breathing. Pierce tried to salvage something from the wreckage. "Mr. Murphy, please. This is clearly a misunderstanding. We can bring Stephen back immediately. Full reinstatement, promotion, whatever compensation package he requires." Patrick looked at me with raised eyebrows, like he was asking if I wanted to consider their desperate offer. I smiled. "No, sir. I'm quite happy with my new position. Better pay, better benefits, and most importantly, better management." Patrick nodded approvingly. "Then there's no one here I trust to handle this transaction." He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back at Christopher. "Young man, you called my office yesterday and lied about Stephen's status. You told my staff he was unavailable due to a family emergency. That was either incompetence or dishonesty. I don't do business with companies that employ either." Christopher's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "But the contract, the terms were agreed to. We have a binding letter of intent." "Letters of intent are contingent on due diligence and good faith dealing," Patrick said coldly. "You've demonstrated neither. Good day, gentlemen." He walked out. I followed him, leaving behind 14 years of my life and a $300,000 deal that had just evaporated in the most expensive temper tantrum in corporate history. The aftermath was swift and brutal. By noon, Pinnacle's stock had dropped 18%. By close of business, it was down 31%. The business media picked up the story by Monday morning. Failed leadership costs Pinnacle Holdings $3.2 billion deal. The board called an emergency meeting Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, Christopher's uncle had been forced into early retirement. Christopher himself was quietly let go with a non-disclosure agreement that basically paid him to disappear and never talk about what happened. They tried everything to salvage the deal. Called Patrick's office, offered concessions, even flew a delegation to Michigan to meet with him personally. Patrick refused to take their calls. When they showed up at his facility uninvited, his security team escorted them off the property. 8 months later, we completed the merger with Sterling Manufacturing Group, a third-generation industrial company based in Ohio. They understood heritage. They valued tradition. They respected the handshake agreements that had governed Murphy Industrial for 100 years. Final sale price, $3,400,000, $200 million more than Pinnacle had offered. As for me, I'm doing just fine. My office has a view of Lake Michigan, a fully stocked bourbon cabinet, and walls lined with thank you letters from clients who appreciate that some things can't be digitized. My contact book is bigger than ever, full of people who understand that real business happens between human beings, not computer systems. Last week, I got a Christmas card from Michelle Brooks. She found a new job at a company that values experience over algorithms. Timothy Carroll retired with a full pension and sends me hunting photos from Montana. Anthony Pierce landed on his feet at another firm. Christopher Brooks? Last I heard, he was working for a tech startup in Austin, probably trying to disrupt something that doesn't need disrupting. Here's what I learned from all this. Sometimes the old ways work because they've been tested by time and proven in the real world. Sometimes respect and relationships matter more than innovation and efficiency. And sometimes, if you're patient and play your cards right, life gives you exactly the justice you deserve. The corporate world is full of Christopher Brooks, young, arrogant, and convinced that technology can replace human judgment. But there will always be Patrick Murphys too. Men who understand that business is ultimately about trust between people, not data points in a system. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.